Welcome to the first of our Monday morning legislative breakfasts, brought to you by the Bridgeport Range and by Addison County Farm Bureau, with help from the Addison Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Commission. We are here every Monday throughout the legislative session. There is a schedule, and this is our opportunity. On behalf of the Grange and the Farm Bureau, this is our opportunity for us to have a closer communication with those who make and pass and design and have the ideas for legislation in Montpelier during the session. We're very pleased that you've come out. We hope that you tell your friends to come out too each week. There are only a few rules that we need to talk about before we begin, and those are, the first rule is everyone must, absolutely must, stand up and use a microphone whenever they would like to speak. They should be recognized by the moderator and come to a microphone. It makes it easier for most of us to hear, number one, hear, and those folks who are at home watching it on television. So, folks will have up to 2 minutes to question or comment. The questions can be directed to one or all of the legislators present, and the legislators will have up to 3 minutes to respond to each question if they wish. And you see Jim has a little traffic signal up here. It'll turn green when you can speak, yellow when it's nearing the end of your 2 minutes, and red when you need to stop. If there are no, if we're on a topic, we'll stay on that topic until you're tired of it, and we'll move on to the next topic. If there are no more comments, I'll be asking for new topics as we go through. So, each topic we're going to try to limit in size, but we'll see where we can go for today. My name is Tim Buskey. I'm a representative from the board of the Addison County Farm Bureau. And when you rise, I'd ask you to also tell us your name and your town so that we are aware of where you're coming from. First of all, we have legislators with us. And we're going to allow them a little leeway today to stand up, introduce themselves, and let us know what committees they are serving on in the legislature, and maybe even if there's time in their short period of time, give us a piece of legislation it's now under consideration in your committee. And we'll start with the senators. Ruth Hardy, if you'll move to a microphone, you can introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing.
Okay. Let me face everyone. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, and exciting that the legislative breakfasts are starting up again. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy, and I represent the Addison District, along with my colleague, Chris Bray. I serve on the Education Committee and the Agriculture Committee. In the Education Committee, we are working on one of my bills that I'm very excited about that would provide tuition assistance to students at CCB, which is our Community Colleges of Vermont. So we're working on how we can make that work financially, but CCV serves 15,000 students a year, and some of them are our most vulnerable and students who really need assistance with paying for their college education. It's often a way for them to get into the pipeline to get post-secondary education. So I'm really hopeful that we can find something that works there. We're also looking at revising some special education laws, and there was a huge report that just came out about financing our education system in general and how our K-12 funding formula works, so we're taking a look at that to see if this is the right time to make changes in our education funding formula. Let's see, in agriculture, we're working on a variety of things, including looking at various pesticides and whether or not we should alter the use of certain pesticides. We are looking at a program that would provide greater incentives for schools to buy local foods, so it would help both schools and farmers. And we are looking at a report that came out this year that we had asked for last session on sort of the strategic plan for agriculture in Vermont. It's a really large report, so we're going through that and looking more closely at that. So those are just a few highlights.
Thank you. Senator Bray.
Turn this around so I can see you all. Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I live in Bristol. After 20 years in New Haven, we moved over to Bristol. In the Senate, you serve on 2 committees. So my morning committee, which I serve as chair on, is Natural Resources and Energy. And I've been doing that for 7 years now. And the work that we do in there has been related to environment and energy issues. So for instance, we've worked over the years on the clean water bills in terms of having a Lake Champlain cleanup plan, finally committing to funding that plan at an adequate level in the last year, improving the way we deliver all that work, trying to make sure that we get the best possible outcomes for the dollars we're spending. We also work on issues related to toxic substances in the water. You may all have heard about this substance PFAS, perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, down in Bennington that has been poisoning people. We've created a statewide program to measure at all public water supplies to make sure that the exposure in Bennington, we would have hoped that it was unique, but we suspected it wasn't. So now we know there are 3 more public water supplies that have worrisome levels and in excess of standards, so we're following up on that. We deal with solid waste issues. So Vermont only has a single landfill left, and it's an expensive way of dealing with trash to haul a great deal of it all the way up to the Northeast Kingdom. Can we do better there? And then we also do a lot of energy bills. So we've worked on Vermont's renewable energy standard. We've worked on bills related to how we cite renewable energy projects. And we just passed out this past Friday on a 5-0-0 vote what we call the Energy Efficiency Modernization Bill. And the point of that is that we have climate change is driven first and foremost by the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Simple physics, a profound number of negative consequences for people and every living thing in terms of what's going on. So how can you attack such a broad problem? Well, we're going directly at the source, saying, what can we do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Right now, we have the cleanest grid in the United States. That's 63% renewable and 93% carbon-free. Let's use that clean grid to take on more of the tasks that we currently use for fossil fuels. And the 2 biggest tasks are transportation and heating. So you're looking in a toolbox to get a job done. You probably pick up your favorite tool, one that's done good work for you in the past. In this case, Efficiency Vermont. We've run that program for 20 years. It has a long, bright future ahead. But while we have this great tool, we want to say, can we use it to help us tackle greenhouse gas emissions in thermal and transportation? The answer is yes. So we're standing up a new program that will invest up to $6 million over the next 3 years, change the underlying law to allow them to work in those areas because it's been prohibited. And the net result is with raising no fees, no new taxes, we're going to offer Vermonters a chance to save money and reduce their emissions. So it's an opportunity for people to get involved in doing more of that. The last piece of that bill will be next year. We're looking, this is an intermediate step in terms of creating an all-fuels energy efficiency program for the state. That is an 18-month process at the PUC. We don't get that result on how to do that till next year. And so climate change is too pressing to wait for that final report. We know enough to make this intermediate step, and that's the energy efficiency modernization.
Thank you, Chris. Let's go to Representative Norris. Terry? I know he'll set an example for the rest of our introducers.
I'm Representative Terry Norris. I live in Shoreham. I represent Benson, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. I serve on the Agriculture and Forestry Committee. This is my second term there. We are working on several bills. One of them that's probably, if you've seen the WCAX report from yesterday about the farm in Brandon, we're working on a adequate shelter for livestock bill. I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot about that coming probably next week. And we're working on a miscellaneous agriculture subjects, which is basically the Department of Agriculture, Food and Markets housekeeping bill. There's lots of things in it, probably mostly just for their convenience and to make their job a little more efficient. One of the things we're working on is the chronic wasting disease and the captive deer, and how the department will deal with feral swine. Probably you will never see a feral swine, but technically if you have pigs and they're out for 96 hours, they could be classified as feral swine. So, and we're working on something that I think is going to, it could affect us from January 1st, or not January, July 1st. Food residuals will not be be able to go in your garbage. So there's like 6 anyway that we know of that would like to be able to pick this up and use it for composting and chicken feed, but there's a little discrepancy because it is considered solid waste and not food source for chickens, so we're trying to work that out. And another thing that I think is important, a couple of years ago we passed agritourism for on-farm accessory businesses, so this year we're going to work on limiting the liability for agritourism businesses, considering what things could happen on a farm. I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Representative Elder.
Thank you very much. My name is Caleb Elder. I represent Addison 4. So that's Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, and Starksboro, and I'm on the House Education Committee. So far this year we've been working primarily on 2 bills, a literacy bill. There are several literacy bills introduced, some of which look directly at dyslexia and screening for dyslexia. One of those came from the Scott administration through a vice chair, and then 2 other members also introduced them. So we're working on a committee bill that kind of conflates those 3 bills and some of the ideas that are shared across them. It is a pretty hot topic. Kind of reading science and the science around literacy is a little confusingly controversial in some ways. We've had some results that show that over 60% of Vermont students are at a basic or below basic reading level, which is even basic is slightly below grade level, so the numbers are not good. At the same time, we're talking a lot about a balanced literacy approach versus a structured literacy approach, and the conflicts there are real. So we're diving into that, and I think that a lot of that has to do with the bill that's already been passed called Act 173, which has to do with just providing, greater supports to all students when they need it early on in the process. And so I think we'll come to a good place on that, but that has been, we've had a number of hearings on that and just a lot of committee time on it. Another piece we're looking at is some administrative changes or fixes, depending on your perspective, to the pre-K program, which has been in place a little over 5 years. Right now, we have what's called a mixed delivery system, so that means that pre-K programs are run both through the public schools and through private childcare centers, as well as home-based providers. And there are some, there's the Agency of Human Services, as well as the Agency of Education involved in regulating that program because of the mixed delivery system, and that is complicated. It's also probably necessary to kind of meet families where they are in terms of where we administer that 10 hours of universal pre-K that the state of Vermont does fund through public education dollars. So we're looking at some of those fixes. We're also looking at some potential rule changes. I could get into how I feel about that. I guess I won't opine for now, but without saying that I'm more convinced the administrative fixes are needed, and I'm less convinced that the rule changes are going to be helpful. So that might sound like the same thing, but I can parse that for those who are interested. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Cordes. Mari.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Representative Mari Cordes from Lincoln. I represent Lincoln, Bristol, Moncton, and Starksboro with Representative Elder. I am on the House Healthcare Committee, and I am Vice Chair with Representative James from Manchester on the Climate Solutions Caucus. As Senator Bray mentioned, we hit the ground running on working on the climate crisis, and the 4 areas that we are moving forward on in the Climate Solutions Caucus and in every committee in the State House are resiliency, the all fuels, efficiency, transportation, and weatherization, as well as resilience. So that last one is a pretty broad topic, and it does include the resilience that you might think of when you think of Tropical Storm Irene and what we as a state did to pull together to help each other in community. And the reason that some towns and some areas did better after Irene than others is because they already had a strong network, a social network, so that they already had the structure in place to help each other out efficiently. So that's part of the work of resilience, is making sure that every community has a good, strong social network, so that we can reach out to each other in crisis with EMS, all of the state agencies. The other parts of resilience you may be familiar with, and Senator Bray and Senator Hardy are doing this kind of work, as well as Representative Sheldon as chair of the House Natural Resources Committee, making sure that we have strong riparian buffers, that we have enough wild forests to be carbon sinks, that we can do our best to prevent flood damage. So the last thing I'll say about the Climate Solutions Caucus is that we are tasked, there's a representative who is in every committee, and this is called the Every Committee Project. I, on the Healthcare Committee, am tasked with working with my committee to address the impact of climate change. One of the issues is very real, and that is mental health. So we're working hard, as we did last session, in-house healthcare to improve access to peer and community mental health resources. Staff work very hard, the frontline staff. Many of you may know the folks at CSAC, the Addison County Counseling Services. They need a lot of help to support their workers because their staff, their skilled staff, are moving to other places where they get paid a more livable wage. So we're doing everything we can to lift up the frontline workers around mental health. Also, in healthcare, our committee and I are very concerned about the lack of affordability of healthcare. I introduced a bill that that addresses the high cost of some pharmaceuticals. There are only 3 multinational companies that produce insulin, and they do have a monopoly. They do collude. So, as many of you may know, the cost of insulin is prohibitive for many people. People are dying because and I see this where I work. I'm a nurse. I work at UVM Medical Center. I see what happens when people have to decide between stretching out their insulin, which is not a good idea, or paying to heat their home. So I introduced a bill, and it's to reduce the out-of-pocket expenses for insulin to $100 a month. And this bill was modeled after the Colorado bill, and Representative Dylan Roberts was successful in passing that bill after his own brother died from seizures from a diabetic coma because he was in the same situation. He couldn't afford his insulin. So the issue about pharmaceuticals is actually much bigger than a state issue. And Representative Tim Briglin and I and others worked on this bill together. We talked with Representative Roberts in Colorado. We all recognize that this is squeezing the balloon. So it's not going to fix the root of the problem and the systemic problem, which absolutely needs to change. But we felt that we had to do something to help Vermonters now. And I won't go on, but there are many other things that we are working on actively in our committee to make healthcare more affordable, and also to support, we have another workforce issue in healthcare. We're going to be short thousands of nurses, and we are short many primary care providers. So we're going to work on that to make sure that all of us here in this room can access a provider, access medicine, access care when you need it, and have it be affordable.
Thank you, Representative. And back home now to Vergennes. Matt Byron.
Thank you, Mr. Buskey. Good morning, everyone. Representative Matt Byron, Addison 3. I represent Vergennes, Harrisburg, Waltham, Panton, and Addison. Just going to start off real quick. Representative Blanford apologizes for not being here this morning. She has committee work. Her budget committee appropriations is 5 days a week at this time of the year, so they have an early call time today. For those of you who don't remember, my committee assignment is it's kind of a broad range of issues that we deal with. The title of the committee itself is General Housing and Military Affairs. So the military affairs and the housing kind of speak to themselves, but the general really is general. We deal with labor law, liquor lottery, various other small Native American relations, anything like that. So we have a lot of different items that we're working on. We started off the year with 2 of the bigger notable labor policies, the family medical leave program, as well as minimum wage. Moving those along occupied the first maybe 2 weeks or so of the session. Then we moved on to primarily housing-focused topics, excuse me, including taking an assessment of housing bond that the state had approved and administered over the last few years. That was about a $35 million housing bond. Impacts with that, or progress that we've seen with that in this area, would be the currently under construction Armory Lane project and projects like that throughout the state. We took testimony from a lot of advocacy organizations, state organizations, as well as the treasurer, who is the one who really puts her eyes on the bonding concepts around the state. For bills myself that I have introduced, I have one in my committee that I think is relevant to this area. It takes a look at Vermont's established and respected distilling, brewing, alcohol manufacturing industry, and how it can work better with local agriculture. And it incentivizes the use of local ingredients with the alcohol manufacturers in this state. So that's kind of like the big picture on it. Obviously, it's more detailed. So I'm trying to find ways for local agriculture, especially areas that are really struggling with the dairy prices, how they can diversify their agricultural portfolio, product line, whatever you want to call it, and help integrate that into the alcohol beer manufacturing industry. We've taken a lot of testimony over the last week or so on recovery housing, which is a transitional housing philosophy for people who obviously are in recovery, struggling with addiction, and how they can stay rooted in a community while they're receiving the help they need, even stay grouped with their families so they're not isolated while they're in a recovery process, and still have the ability to interact, get employment while they're getting treatment, and not lose sort of community contact while they are struggling through addiction and treatment. Gaming, we also deal with gaming. The sports betting concepts have been floated around this region. New Hampshire's done it recently, as well as a few other New England states. The legislature's taking a look at those topics right now. I attended a conference on the West Coast maybe 3 weeks ago, and that really was looking at how the concept of sports betting is applied at the legislative level as a revenue source. That conversation is just starting, so I'll just kind of leave it as a topic we're looking at. I think that's pretty much all I have for you right now until you start asking questions.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, if I haven't missed any legislators, we'll open the floor for questions. Move to a microphone, if you will, and get in line. We'll start the topics.
John Ball from Bristol. Senator Bray moved to Bristol. I had to move there too, I guess. We both arrived at about the same time. It's fun having him as a neighbor. I'd like to start the legislative session this year off with remembering one of the regular attenders here at the legislative breakfast, Ted Caldwell. He passed on Thanksgiving. I know that there are some people here who know him. I hardly ever saw him miss a session. I started somewhere around the early 90s, and he was a common fixture here, along with his wife Olive, who passed in 2009, I think. I personally will miss Ted. He was a friend of mine, and I think it's a big loss to the community and the legislative breakfast to not have him anymore. So, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bowman.
Mark Loban, Addison, Vermont. We've been hearing a lot about protecting our elections, and I want to address that issue with Vermont. Last year, when I went, or 2 years ago, 4 years ago, when I went to a primary, I had to declare my party in order to get a ballot to vote. That is unconstitutional. Vermont statutes, 17 VSA 2363, Voter's Choice of Party. Section A, a voter shall vote for the candidates of one party only. A person voting at the primary shall not be required to indicate his or her party of choice to any election official. So the requirement that we declare that we are a member or voting in a particular party is illegal. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, in one part, prohibits, Section 4, that a voter prove his qualifications by voucher of registered voters or members of any other class. So that is the other class, being a member of a party. There are a couple other areas that are in the statute that require the secret ballot. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I did find this person that wrote this, which I agree wholeheartedly with. A primary is only a method for a party to pick a candidate. who they will endorse in the general election. Since that is the case, it is actually unfair to allow non-party members to make that choice. Only members of a group should determine where the resources of that group should go. What is completely unfair is that the government is involved in the primary process in any way. That is, forcing non-party members through taxes to support an internal process that is a political party. In most areas, this functions as a huge subsidy to the Republicans and Democratic parties. Primaries should be closed, and the parties holding them should pay for them. So my point is if the primary is closed and you have to declare a party, it should not be paid for by public funds. And if it's paid for by public funds, it should be open and everybody should be able to vote without declaring a party. Thank you.
Okay, answer from a legislator or a comment.
Thank you, Mark. So election integrity is certainly a critical thing that we all count on in Vermont, and we're seeing challenges around the country on that issue. Happily, I would say my afternoon committee I serve on is government operations, and we talked with the chief elections officer of the state, who is the Secretary of State. He came in and delivered his annual update. I would say in general, I'm surprised to hear about the instance you're talking about. I'd like to follow up with you after. It is illegal to, as I understand as well, to require someone to identify their party, which is why my experience, and maybe I hope everyone else is here, is that when you vote in a primary, you're handed all the primary ballots. You choose the one that you want to vote, and then you discard the balance. So you have, it's an entirely open and confidential process that way. So I'll follow up with you after, and as far as I know, the incident you're describing should not have happened.
Thank you, Senator. Caleb?
Well, I think Senator Bray kind of hit on it a little. I was wondering if by being asked to pick a party, you just meant that you had to pick one of the three to vote on. Because it's an open process and you could have picked any of them, but at the end of the day, you do have to put one in the box. I didn't know if that's the choosing you were talking about as the filing of one. Yeah, just curious.
If I may respond to that, I had to pick the party to get the ballot for that party. So it was publicly disclosed.
I see. So it wasn't the case where you got all three and then...
Not like Mr. Bray, Senator Bray described getting all three. Prior to the last election, it was the process that Senator Bray referred to, where you got the primary ballots for all of them. You put one in to be counted and you discarded the other. I have no problem with that. But the problem is, I am formerly a Russian linguist and an analyst. And I can tell you, if you want to listen ad nauseum, the mathematics of what they call data mining, where after one election, they can pick which areas to target with political ads, and after three, they can probably identify who voted for which party.
Well, thanks for that clarification. I certainly will just end by saying, yeah, I think that the open primary in Vermont is a feature that I personally like. And I do think that your experience sounds not in keeping with my understanding of how it works.
I have a health care question for Mari, but because you just had this discussion, Bristol is putting on a community forum on the evolution of the presidential election process. And it's going to be February 13th at the Bristol Fire Station. The speaker is Jeff Johnson. He's a graduate of Millbury College, but he's been head of his history department in high school for many years. And I think it'll be, this may be an opportune time to talk about. You're all welcome. It's nonpartisan. My question to Mari is that I'm very concerned about the Brattleboro Retreat Center. And I only get my source from Vermont Digger, so you can update me. But I understand that they are in financial trouble. They need $2 million. But what was disturbing to me, it says they're having they're having a real decrease in patient load. at the retreat, and that didn't make any sense to me. So it raised a red flag for me is, what's the quality of care now? I mean, why aren't people, this should be flooded. It's a hospital for mental health and addiction. And so it just started me thinking, what is going on? And also, we know we're putting too many people in jail due to addiction problem when they should have, they should go to a treatment center like Brattleboro, and we have a problem here. So this isn't making any sense to me, and I need some clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Our House Health Care Committee did take testimony from the state and from the CEO at the Brattleboro retreat. At this time, because the state and the retreat are still in negotiations about how to move forward, I don't have details about exactly what that looks like. So we as a legislature are we're intentionally not involved in the negotiating aspect, but I can say the state is absolutely committed to making sure that the Brattleboro retreat succeeds. It's one of the, I think the only, or one of the few areas where minors can receive psychiatric care. As far as the census, that's a little bit hard to track. There are, in healthcare, how many patients are in an institution like a hospital or the Brattleboro retreat does flux. Sometimes there are cases where one patient or one resident, it's not safe or recommended for other reasons for other people to be roomed with that person. So that drops the census down. And then there's the transition time between discharge and then admitting another person. And you've highlighted one of the biggest problems in our system right now is a lack of available beds, we call them. And it's causing a backup in the correctional system where there are people who are still incarcerated only because there's no place for them to go, which is another reason our committee is so focused on community and peer mental health supports so that there can be residential care in the communities, and there's an appropriate placement for folks who need that kind of care. The other issue is, I think, an internal one at the retreat, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about it, but we have had, there are indications that there may need to be changes made in the administration and the management of the facility. There are nursing staff who have raised some serious concerns. There's a use of a lot of travelers, which in my experience, traveling nurses are brought in when, yes, there is a nursing shortage, but when the workplace is so poor that no one wants to work there, which is what this nurse brought up, that's when they bring travelers in, and there has been an increase at the retreat. So I think there are some substantial issues, and we are going to make sure the Brattleboro retreat not only survives, but continues to serve our community. Did that answer it?
Thank you.
And we can talk more.
Certainly. You're next.
Okay. I'm gonna, go ahead, please.
My name is Elizabeth Lowry, and I'm from Waltham, and I am on the Board of Civil Authority, and we pass out everything, and the ones that they don't vote on go in the special box, and the ones they vote on go in the other box. Anyhow, my question is, how can we repeal Act 46 so that we can have democracy back in our school system? Ruth Hardy, I believe, was on that committee.
Okay, Senator Hardy has been called.
A whole bunch of school boards.
I see you guys lining up.
If you want to just sort of lay it all out.
Go ahead. I really answer your question.
question, but I know they have to.
Yeah, so my name is John Straub. I'm on the school board here in Addison Northwest. And I live here in Vergennes. I want to talk about the same thing. I mean, Ruth said, what they're thinking about changing funding formulas, and I would say, please do, because our rural schools are going to close, and they're going to close all over Addison. The pressures on our budgets are real. I'm not going to stand here and blame Act 46, but I'm going to tell you like a fact. We're going to cut the budget in Addison Northwest School District by like 1.5%, and our taxes are still going to increase. They're going to increase because our enrollment is declining, and we're not going to get out of this declining enrollment for 4 or 5 years, and we're all looking at this across the entire county. So we desperately need a new way to think about how we're going to fund some schools in rural places with really small populations, whether we're really going to do it or not. So I'm thinking about the long term. I know Sue's going to talk about something immediately right now. And I'm just like, I think we really need to think big picture about where we're going to go and how we're going to support some communities when we're going to have to start consolidating those schools. I don't see any way out of that. So I'll let Sue talk a little bit more.
So hi, my name is Sue Rakowski. I'm the chair of the Addison Northwest School Board, and I'm a Vergennes resident. And yes, as John said, I want to talk about something specific that happened very recently. Some news that we received, that the school board received on Friday from the state of Vermont. After our communities have struggled and worked really hard to get a school budget out that keeps us under the per pupil threshold, this sort of mandatory line or somewhat mandatory line that the state sets in terms of per pupil cost. On Friday morning, we received some news that the state re-verified the equalized pupil numbers for the Vermont school districts, and that revision pushes our district's per pupil spending over the threshold to a projected tax rate increase of 5.4 cents instead of anticipated 3.7 cents. So, the lateness of this change coming from the state it's egregious. It puts us in a horrible situation. We've already warned our budget. We can't make any changes at this point. It completely undercuts our community's ability to impact its tax impact, the tax impact of the school budget. So yes, I'm asking for the help of the legislature. Please, as we said, we're going to look at school funding. Please do. Please seriously take a look at it. We need help. And most immediately for this coming year, this fiscal year 21, if there's any leeway in changing the threshold amounts, the yield amounts, or any other factors to alleviate the impact of this last minute change, that's what I would ask that you do, please.
Senator Ruth. Hope you have the answer.
Well, I can, about the question about Act 46. So Act 46 was passed several years ago, and I was, at the time when it was passed, I was a local school board member, actually, down in the Middlebury area. So I worked on, as everyone up here did, the changes necessary to merge our school districts down in Addison Central, just as your school board did and your community did here. And so I'm very familiar with it from both the local level and the state level. I was not in the legislature when it passed. However, it did, as you know, and one of the challenges is that it radically changed the configuration of school districts around the state. And it caused several districts to be very concerned and to file lawsuits against the state related to Act 46. So those lawsuits are still pending before the Vermont Supreme Court. So it is highly unlikely that we would do anything related to Act 46 while there's still pending legal action. We need to see what the Supreme Court says prior to making any changes. That being said, I also just don't think, unless the court orders a change to Act 46, that there's an appetite to change Act 46 in a major way. And that is because, as your school board members mentioned, we are seeing radical enrollment declines across the state. Addison County is one of the counties that's seen the greatest decline in the students, but it is a statewide phenomenon. We have 26,000 fewer students now than we did at the beginning of 20 years ago. So that's a significant number. We have fewer than 80,000 students in the state. And we have many, 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 many schools. Many of them are small, and many of them are very expensive to run. Because they are so small, they are not able to get sort of the efficiency of numbers. So we're in a really tight spot with not enough kids and high education costs. People are concerned about property taxes or taxes just in general. So Act 46 was really came about because of this incredible decline in the number of students. And also that decline in the number of students and the mass number of schools we have across the state also caused a lot of equity issues. So that students were going to school. One school district may not have been getting an equal education to what students in another school district were getting. So Act 46 was an attempt to both reduce the costs and increase the efficiency, but also increase the equity of education across the state. So I hear your frustration. I understand the tumult that has happened across the state, not just in this community, but in many communities. I also want to say that there are many communities where the merged school districts are working really, really well. And I think the ones we hear about are the ones that are going through this sort of tumult. In terms of the funding issues that you guys brought up, and I will note that Sue and I had a long conversation yesterday about this issue, so I know it's a concern, and I have not yet, because I just heard about it yesterday afternoon, had a chance to talk to the Agency of Education, so I don't have any solid information for you, but I can tell you that as we discussed the yield and the threshold are set later in the legislative session, and the bill usually in April, and that is done after all the school districts around the state pass their budgets, so we can see how much we need to fund education. So I understand that it's super frustrating that you got a revised number of your pupils, and I will talk to AOE and ask them why that happened. When I was a school board member, it always frustrated me that there was not complete information when we were trying to warn our budget for people to vote on. So it's unacceptable that they keep changing it, and I will talk to them to figure out what was behind these most recent changes for sure. You won't have full information until we pass the threshold and the yield in April, and it is kind of, as I said yesterday, a kooky system because it creates, makes you do your work without having full information. We are also doing our work without full information, so until schools pass their budgets, we don't know how much money we need in the education fund. So it's kind of a catch-22 where neither the state nor the locals have full information until after March and all of the calculations are done. So it's an imperfect system for sure, but that's part of the reason it's an imperfect system is because in Vermont we value local control. We want local school districts to be able to pass their budgets, and if we don't have them pass their budgets first, the state is not able to fully fund education. So I know that that's not obviously the answer you wanted, but and in terms of John's larger questions about the education finance system, we just got a major report. It came out actually on Christmas Eve, the weighting study, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you read it. It is a study that looks at the entire way that we count pupils in our system, and as Sue noted, we count students in our education finance system on an equalized basis. So what that means is some students we consider to be more expensive than other students to educate. So for example, high school students have traditionally been considered more expensive to educate because they need more specialized equipment for their labs. They have a broader set of classes. Their teachers may be more expensive to hire. So high school students have been weighted at 1.13 students, and elementary school students are 1. And students who are English language learners are more expensive to educate, and students who live in poverty because they need more supports and more educational services. So these weights were set over 20 years ago in our funding formula around the time of Act 60, and now we are looking at them again to see if those weights are actually reasonable, if they make sense, if the math is correct, what has changed in the way that we educate students, and what should those weights be. And this study came out and made recommendations for very, very different weights, including weighting students in poverty much higher than they are weighted right now, and also including a weight for what the author of the study calls rurality, which is a new word. I don't know, I hadn't heard it before, but it is what you were referring to, John, and so sparsity and rurality. School districts that are very rural and they're far apart from other school districts, meaning that there's no opportunity for them to merge. They have to be far apart and they have to be small because of the geography of where they are. And these districts are a lot of them are in the Northeast Kingdom, but there are other parts of the state that also. And so this report recommends putting in a weight for districts that are sparse and rural. We just got the report, as I said. We're still going through it. We're still trying to figure out what makes sense. I think we will be moving forward with something. I would be surprised if we did a major overhaul this session. I think it's going to be a two-session process where we're trying to figure out what the best thing to do is. Just as an example, when the numbers were run, they were run on FY18, so 2 years ago. So when I looked at it, I said, well, things have changed a lot in 2 years. A lot of districts have merged. Things are very different. So can we get updated numbers? The FY20 numbers just came out at the last week. I know, I got asked 3 questions though. So, FY20 numbers just came out, so I haven't had a chance to go through them yet. So, and I'm happy to have a little corner where everybody wants to talk to me about education issues, and if you want to do that, I can say a little later. So, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Just as an interjection from the Grange and Farm Bureau, we're very pleased to have the ability to have these sessions where citizens can speak to members of their citizen legislature, and a reminder that all of the folks who do this job do it out of the kindness and goodness of their hearts. And especially both Grange and Farm Bureau would like to thank Chairman Sue for her service during a very, very tumultuous time, and encourage civil discourse. The ability to talk with one another without getting nasty. And we're hopeful that that will continue, but it is a very heated discussion. Very hard for me to step back and be a moderator in these situations, but just wanted to let you, thank you very much for your service. Caleb, did you have a comment?
Sure, I'll say a couple things. Thank you for those 3 questions. You know, Act 46 was passed before I was in the legislature. It was actually passed just before I joined the Robinson Elementary School Board, which was for Starksboro Elementary, and then I was part of the Act 46 Study Committee, and now I'm on the Mount Abe Unified School District Board. And so I guess I would say that one thing that was notable to me this year is that, yes, we're waiting to see what the Supreme Court says, but also, if Starksboro was still on its own, we would have a much worse budget than we do merged. That's not necessarily, you know, a purely like, well, therefore Act 46 was the right thing. There's still room for disagreement, but Starksboro has lost another 24% of its students in the last 4 years. Okay, so 24% in 4 years. And Bristol has gained 1% in 4 years. The fact that we're with Bristol is majorly helping us on our equalized pupil this year. If we were on our own with that 24% decline, I don't think there's any way we pass our school budget, whereas this year, we're gonna be challenged, but I hope we'll pass it. So I would put that in the category of anecdotal, but there are some things that Act 46 can do to help. Now, I don't think what Act 46 was made to do is to immediately presage the closure of a bunch of elementary schools. To me, a big part of it was to not do that, was to maintain local elementary schools and have greater equity across them and share some costs between them and share equalized pupil variability, as I was just describing. So I have to say that when I'm looking at school budgets, I can see how, wow, if we closed a lot of elementary schools, we'd save some money in the short term, but when I look at the total size of our budget and the cost-driving factors, which are really, increases in teacher pay, which frankly are totally reasonable and basically just cost of living increases, increases in teacher health care, which are astronomical and are eating us alive, and then the deflationary situation with equalized pupil, those are just like, it's kind of like a head-on collision of two numbers, because the equalized pupil is, you imagine your school budget, it's the denominator, it's under the dividing line. So any change to that number has a huge impact, no matter what you do to the numerator, which is basically the education spending. So when education spending is getting blown up like a balloon by healthcare numbers, and the denominator, equalized pupil, is deflating rapidly, you can't get ahead of it. And I'm just going to go out and say you can't get ahead of it by closing elementary schools either. My opinion, okay? Not speaking for the Mount Airy School Board or the Education Committee, but I don't think you can get ahead of it by closing schools either. I think that buys you 3 or 4 years and you're right back to where we are. So I want to see us do major changes in what we do for healthcare. Mari was talking about that. I think that has to be part of this conversation. I also think looking at the way the formula is constructed is appropriate, because I don't think that when we envisioned this structure of funding, it wasn't, malicious or anything, but I don't think anybody was looking at it and saying, wow, let's run the numbers on this if we have 25 years of unprecedented population deflation in our student body. I just don't think that thought experiment happened. I don't think there was a reason to play it out, but now we're gaming it out in real time and it doesn't work. So, Ruth mentioned a lot of things we're doing, and I'll just wrap up here by saying the equalized pupil number getting adjusted on Friday is totally unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable how late school districts get that number to begin with. There's capacity issues with the Agency of Education. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but I think I can just say objectively, school districts are having to walk right up against that threshold spending line. Whereas in recent years, maybe if you didn't know exactly what that number is till April, you'd be like, well, we have a little less headroom than we think. Now it's like, are we under or are we over? And so when we're right up against that line, we need to have more information. And so yes, I think that I couldn't believe when I heard that Vergennes had gotten a new EQP number, equalized pupil number, because that's just like it's one of the critical numbers. You build your whole budget around it. You've already warned a budget, which you have to do in order to vote it on town meeting day and to have it changed. So I am gonna, there's some meetings this week with other folks and we're trying to learn more about that, but I just want to reinforce that, yeah, that can't happen. We need to, in addition to the formula, talk about the variables that go into the formula and the timeline on which those are available, and really look at our system, because it is this circular kind of thing, this dance between the state and the local spending, and I understand why it's that way, but at this point we're too close to the margins, and and that cycle of back and forth is getting too delayed. It's just not practicable to develop budgets.
Thank you, Caleb.
So I was in the legislature when Act 46 came up, and I did vote for it. And the reason was that for about a week or two, literally, it was talked about as a way of saving money. Then enough work happened that it became clear, people said, we shouldn't talk about this as a money-saving opportunity. The real reason to consider changing the way we manage education is for equity, so that no matter where you're born, you'll have access to an equal opportunity and for quality education in the state. There are a lot of things that have sort of gotten wrapped under the mantle of Act 46 causing X, Y, or Z. For instance, there have been some very controversial, quote-unquote, facility studies lately, what does each building cost? And people see that that may foreshadow closing the school. But Act 46, I'll just tell you, having been there when we talked about it, it was about trying to ensure equal quality education to every Vermont child. The way it's playing out is a work in progress. One of the great things from my point of view, at being part of a citizen legislator, is we have in Caleb and Ruth, two former school board members who have dealt with it directly on the home front side, now in the legislature, in committees of jurisdiction, bringing those stories in so they have a deep understanding of what we're trying to sort out. The last quick thing I'd come back to is a conversation I had with Sue and when I served on Senate Education in a prior session, to reconsider how we do the math. And that is that we deliver many social services at schools. So mental health, physical health, programming, that an ideal place to deliver it is in a school. But maybe that rather than chalking them up as part of the cost of education, they should really be treated as a healthcare figure, and it might be supported, for instance, through Agency of Human Services. So sometimes I think we are laying higher costs on quote-unquote education than education should be required to carry in and of itself. And that's a conversation I'll continue to have in the State House, and I think it's something we ought to think through a little further.
Thank you, Senator. Yes.
Ed Bain, report. First, I want to ask if anybody has addressed the climate committee bill. It seemed, what little I could gather looking at it, it seemed like they were going to make a independent committee, board, whatever, not governed by the legislature, that could put any laws that they really cared to put in. And I think it's just an end run by the climate control people. Climate is a very important thing. But I am very nervous about the things like the carbon tax and stuff. Being 76 years old, I don't have much of a stream of income. And my conception is that when they had the 70s and we had the gas and fuel strike, the Southerners said, let them freeze in the dark. And I'm afraid that some of these initiatives, although they may be very good concept, are going to leave me freezing in the dark. And it really, really ticks me off. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Bray's all ready to answer your first question.
Sure. So I think Ed was talking about the so-called Global Warming Solutions Act when you're referring to a large panel of people. So I think I just read the bill, the most current version, on Friday to make sure the bill is in the House, in the Energy and Technology Committee, so it's early stages in development there. I do have the concern that we would turn over to a panel outside the state the responsibility to deliver a plan to the state. For me, I think the reason we have representative government is to have the responsibility of the people to manage themselves on this issue, and so I want the legislature to play the primary role, not to delegate that task. It seems like avoiding work that we should own and solve on behalf of the people of Vermont. Not that an outside panel is not useful, for sure. We are 180 people, no matter what 180 people you ever sent, The 626,000 Vermonters outside the building are going to have far greater expertise, so we should engage them. But I think the task of sorting out our energy future belongs in the legislature proper. Just very briefly on energy costs. So we just looked at an energy burden study. It looks at average median income in the state of Vermont, $58,000, and then calculates how much does the average household spend on energy, meaning electricity, transportation, heating. And it's roughly 10%. $5,800 is what most families spend on energy year in and year out. And as your income declines, that may be over 20% of your budget. It starts to become an unmanageable burden. So the current system is not working particularly well for many middle and lower income Vermonters. So as we think about what we might do, it's not in the abstract, just what does the next system look like. It's worth keeping track of how the current system is having an impact on every Vermonter and how well it's helping us manage energy costs. The last thing on energy and worrying about, the very understandable concern, what would a quote-unquote carbon tax look like? When we run our cars, trucks, etc., heat our homes, we're sending carbon dioxide up in the air. And it's invisible, so we don't see it. It's a little hard to imagine quite what we're doing to ourselves when we do it. But I would equate it to if we had a solid waste system in which we all managed our garbage by walking to our property line and pitching it into the neighbor's yard and then saying, that's it, now I got rid of my garbage. Meanwhile, the neighbor is doing the same, pitching their garbage into your yard. You'd say, hold it, this makes no sense. This isn't solving the problem. What's coming out of our chimneys and tailpipes is garbage, pollution. And what we're not doing is looking at it in a way to manage it rationally. So there are opportunities to both decrease emissions and reduce costs. I mentioned that when we got started today in terms of expanding the potential work under Efficiency Vermont. So there's ways. I wear a button that says be optimistic. And what that button means to me is that when you work well with your neighbors, you can figure out how to do things better. And I've seen us do that over and over again in Vermont. I'm sure that we have positive opportunities to enhance our energy future and our local economy at the same time.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for your question, and I agree it's very important. I would also point out that the impacts of climate change, of the climate emergency, are already upon us, and the people who get impacted the most are the very people that you're talking about, the people that are on fixed incomes, the people who have fewer resources. So I was not alive during this time, but I do recall a period in our country's history where we rallied together to fight a common enemy. One was the Depression and World War II. And we recognized that we were all in this together, and that if we did work together, we could change the infrastructure that our society worked from. And I know that we have to do the same thing with climate change. We have to invest in a new energy infrastructure. We have to keep energy dollars in Vermont. Right now, we're sending our energy dollars outside of the state to multinational fuel companies. So in that process, we absolutely, in every conversation we have, whether it's the Climate Solutions Caucus or in the Senate and House Energy Committees, in every conversation we have, it's okay, we have to do something, we need to work together, and how can we minimize any impact to those that are most vulnerable. So that is incredibly, I want you to know that's incredibly important to us. We're open to ideas about if there were any changes to how we invest in energy, how can we protect the most vulnerable? I think one of my Bristol constituents came up with the idea of a Jiffy card. If there was any change in how we pay for fuel, using a card at the pump that would automatically reduce the cost at the pump. Something like, we're open to any ideas, and we are very committed to A, recognizing climate change is real, it's impacting us now, and B, how can we move forward and protect the most vulnerable? It is very important to us.
Thank you, Mary. We're quickly running out of time, but go right ahead.
And you know, I love to stay under my 2 minutes. Dave Silverman from Middlebury. I just want to get to brass tacks here. Nobody thinks that we shouldn't have a clean environment, a climate that works for us, and nobody doesn't think that we should have good schools for our kids. The problem that we end up with as neighbors, as a community, is that we struggle over paying for it because we feel the tax burden and it hurts us. And it hurts some of us more than others. And I just want to urge our legislators to think about that perhaps a little more broadly and creatively, because every year we spend more than 9% of the general fund, that's almost a dime out of every dollar you pay in income taxes to the state, on jails. Just jails. Not the police, not the judges, not the prosecutors, not the defense attorneys. Jails. And it doesn't make us safer. 80% of our jail admissions are technical parole violations. People who have been let out because they are not a threat to society, they are ready to rejoin their community, but they failed to show up for a parole hearing because they didn't have backup daycare for their children. Back to jail for you. That doesn't help anybody. It makes us very, very poor as a state. And when it comes time to fund those jails, nobody's talking about the cost. Just today, the Appropriations Committee is about to approve 15 more jailers in the Budget Adjustment Act because we're having trouble holding on to jailers because the Department of Corrections is a mess. Guys, we've got to do something about this. We need to reduce the jail population. We need to reduce our jail spending. We need to invest those dollars in housing and treatment and community services. And we got to do it yesterday.
Well, we've come to the end of our program, unless, Mark, you have something really quick. 30 seconds.
Mark Bowman again from Addison. I talked earlier about the election being a threat to our democracy, and I am concerned about the delegation of legislative authority to other boards. The Efficiency Vermont has a tax, they call it a fee, but a tax on your electric bills. That money is expended based on the decisions made by the board, not by elected officials. That's just one example of the legislature granting authority to make rules that they should be retaining themselves. We need elected officials making these decisions. Thank you.
Ruth, did you have a final word?
Well, I was...
There's two final words from the two
Senator Gray
senators.
wants to answer that. I was going to
Yes.
address Mr. Silverman's question.
So I serve on the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. It happens to be a weird area of law that almost everyone finds boring, and I love. It is, Mark raises a good point. The legislature needs to own the responsibility to direct government. There are areas where we need to manage government on issues too technical for the legislature to do that work well. It's beyond our technical expertise, etc. So we delegate authority to agencies and departments to write quote-unquote rules, which have force of law. When the issue is when we tell a department we need to give clear directions, put clear guardrails around what we expect them to do, we need to express the policy underneath it that they're trying to achieve through the rulemaking. And sometimes we do a great job at that, and other times we are too vague. When we're too vague, we can get rules back that don't match what we might have imagined. And there is a back and forth all the time on rulemaking. And I think if there was any little bit of education that every legislator could use, which we don't currently have, I've been trying to get a class started for all of us. It's on how to write good statute that generates appropriate rules, because it's something we could do better on. So,
Thanks, and the final 30 seconds.
Well, I just wanted to comment on what Mr. Silverman said, and I know he knows this, but the Senate Judiciary Committee is working really hard to address the concern that you brought up about furlough violations. As Dave said, these are technical violations that land people back in jail after being maybe out for 1 or 2 days even. So it is creating people being in our correctional system that don't need to be there. So I know that my colleagues on the Judiciary Committee are working on a bill to help address this situation. They are looking at a large report. I think it's called the Justice Reinvestment 2. Justice Reinvestment 2 that was put together by the Council of State Governments, and actually a justice consultant who lives in Cornwall, so I'm very proud of that, one of my constituents. So I know that we are going to be addressing this session. In terms of the 15 correctional officers, it is 15, not 50. Okay, we did just pass that in our budget adjustment bill last week, yes. And part of the issue there is that we actually have a shortage of correctional officers, so a lot of correctional officers are working overtime, and it's not only more expensive when we pay for overtime, but it's a dangerous situation for them. We literally have correctional officers doing a shift, going out and sleeping in their car in the parking lot, and then doing another shift. So we need to be able to more appropriately staff our correctional facilities in a safe and fair way to our employees and to the people who are housing there. So obviously we would like to have fewer correctional officers. I think that's everybody's goal, to have fewer people in prison, or at least that's certainly my goal and the Senate's goal. But in the meantime, we need to have safe staffing levels at our correctional facilities. So it's kind of a short-term, long-term thing. So anyway, thank you for the question, and thanks everyone for giving me the last word.
Thank you, Senator Hardy. And thank you all for coming. Next week, next Monday, we'll be at the Middlebury Regional EMS in Middlebury. That's at 55 Collins Drive next to Porter. Everybody knows where Porter Hospital is. We'll be right out there next to Porter. Again, it begins at 7 a.m. with breakfast, 7:30 with the program, and we're normally done at about 8:45. This program is brought to you each week during the legislative session by the Bridport Grange number 303 and Addison County Farm Bureau, with support from the Chamber, the Regional Planning, and the Economic Development Corporation. And a reminder that if any of you want a great breakfast, like the one that was provided here by the Knights of Columbus at St. Peter's Hall, we're having a breakfast next Sunday here, a fundraising breakfast next Sunday from 8 to 10 in the morning. There'll be omelets to order, sausage gravy on biscuits, homemade cornbread, scrambled eggs, pancakes, and all the fixings next Sunday from 8 to 10. Thank you all for coming.